Mark 5, 1 through 13. Now here's reading of God's word. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tomb to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Verse 9, then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on a nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Jesus had been doing ministry on the western side of the Sea of Galilee. He was teaching the crowds there. After he taught them, he got in the boat and traveled to the eastern shores of the Sea of Galilee. He arrives in the region of the Gerasenes, an area that is called the Decapolis. The Decapolis refers to a group of about 10 Gentile nations or cities, 10 Gentile cities located east of the Sea of Galilee, today in the region of the northwest Jordan and southern Syria. Jesus is traveling from Galilee, the western side of the Sea of Galilee, to this area called the Gerasenes, or the Decapolis. One thing we have to understand, or I want to make note about this transition from going from the western to the eastern shores, is this: that Jesus enters on this trip, he enters into the Gentile territory. This is significant. If you read the Gospels, you know that there are times when in Jerusalem, there are Gentile believers who come, who seek out Jesus. And sometimes we read the church history as the gospel begins to spread from Jerusalem through persecution, Christians now going to the other areas, other cities nearby. We read that there were Gentile believers. So in this type of a trip of Jesus, as he goes into the Gentile nation, is significant. So we see glimpses of these type of events happening. So Jesus' reach is beyond the Jews or the Jewish cities. This is obviously significant because several times, as we know and as we read throughout the scriptures, that the gospel is not just for the Jews, but it is also for the Gentiles. Jesus didn't only come for the Jews, but he came for all people. This is the background. This is the little bit of information that Mark gives us. Mark's gospel, as we begin to read it, and if you've spent some time studying the Gospel of Mark, you know that Mark is all about action. He doesn't beat around the bush. He immediately uses this word, immediately. This is a constant word, and so he says, hey, this is what's happening. Okay? So Mark tells us that as soon as Jesus lands on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, immediately he is greeted by a man. That is not in the NIV translation of today, but if you look at the English Standard Version, ESV, you see that word immediately. Immediately, this man comes to Jesus. There is a contrast in this story, as well as as well as in the previous chapter. There's a contrast between control and chaos. There is a contrast between order and disorder. What we see when we read the story today is that the person who is, this man who comes to Jesus is possessed by a demon. Okay, an evil spirit has control over him. And so we see his life is disorder, there's chaos. And yet with Jesus, it's the complete opposite. There is order. This dynamic is seen in our story today. No matter what's happening, this is what we see. No matter what's happening all around Jesus, Jesus is always in control, that he is always in charge. There's never a moment when he isn't. There is never a moment when he is at a disadvantage. Contrast the evil forces that we read about. Several things that I want to highlight or point about this contrast this morning as we look through the story of the events that take place on the eastern shores of the Sea of Galilee. The evil forces create chaos and instability. This is our first point this morning. Let's look at verses 2 through 5. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with the impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart, broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. This is a description of this man who is what? There is an impure spirit within him. And that impure spirit is about chaos, instability, disorder. Mark's account of this event is also found in Matthew and Luke. It's one of the stories that we see in the Gospels, which is called the Synoptic Gospels. The little details are a little bit different, but when we look at the three different accounts, we see the level of suffering that this man experienced, or the amount of chaos or disorder of this man. In Luke's account, in chapter 8, is the same story. As we read Luke's account, it says this, that the man had been demon-possessed for a long time. Luke tells us that this man was possessed by a demon for a long time. Luke also tells us that this man wore no clothes. The man lived like a wild animal. He lived among the dead, dwelled among the tombs. We know that I mentioned that this is a Gentile region, right? For a Jew to go near the tomb, for a Jew to go near dead bodies, that would be considered unclean. Okay, but this man, he lived among the dead, among the tombs. We also see that this man has supernatural strength. How do we know? Mark tells us that he was often chained, hand and feet. He simply broke the chains. Supernatural strength. He was also tormented as he cried out at night among the tombs, cut himself with stones. He experienced uncontrollable behavior. This is the life, a chaotic life, life that is filled with disorder. The demonic forces, the evil spirit had caused disorder, chaos, instability in his life. There was no possibility for him to return to society. Why? Because oftentimes the spirit caused him to do this. Can you imagine if he was in the house, all of a sudden he's screaming and yelling and just started cutting himself? People would think he's crazy. If available, he will be put into a facility for his own sake, as well as all the others. But you feel for this guy. Why did Jesus go to the eastern shores of the Sea of Galilee? Was he the reason why Jesus came? It makes you wonder. His life was controlled by an evil spirit, an evil force. And we read throughout the Gospels how demons can cause tremendous suffering and harm to a person. There are two accounts, or there's one account that I want to highlight, but read from the two separate accounts that are found in Matthew and Luke. First, in Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 and 15, it says this: When they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. "Lord, have mercy on my son. he said. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. Same account, but from Luke's perspective in Luke chapter 9, verse 37 through 39. The next day, when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met them. A man in the crowd called out, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only child. A spirit seizes him, and he suddenly screams. It throws him into convulsions, so that he foams at the mouth. It scarcely ever leaves him and is destroying him." This is the life of a person who is tormented by an evil spirit. We see the similar kind of descriptions as the man who runs to Jesus. Seizures, suffering, what? Sudden screams. Spirit often throws him into the fire or into the water. They have no control. They have no control over their life, of their behaviors. This poor man watched his son's suffering. We're not told how long this occurred, but the father's plea tells of desperation. He wants relief. It seizes him, throws him into the fire. Can you imagine as a father seeing this happening? He comes to Jesus and he says, "Jesus, you got to do something." The boy is helpless against its powers. He is not in control over his own body. The evil spirit is in control over him. This is one demon, and yet so powerful. One evil spirit caused so much suffering. The evil spirit is about creating as much chaos as possible, as much terror as possible, as much instability in the life of a person as possible, as much suffering as possible. Evil forces, chaos and instability. Second thing we learn in this passage is that evil forces are many. The man whom Jesus met on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee suffered even more than that little boy. Let's read verse 9 together. Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." They respond, Legion. That wasn't so much their name, but it's an interesting response to the question, "What is your name?" I think they responded Legion for several reasons. One is obviously numbers. For they were many, he says. But second, I think, is to promote the strength aspect. Why? Because in the Roman army, a legion was a unit of about 6,000 soldiers. It was a symbol of strength, might, power. Not only were they many, but imagine if you saw an army, organized army of 6,000 coming, marching towards you. It's a symbol of strength. We're not sure how many unclean spirits tormented this man, but the response implies that there were many. Legion. We are legion. We are many. By choosing this name, the demons not only stated that they were numerous, but it implied that they are strong. There's many of us, there's only one of you. We are legion. One commentator writes this. Legion said, "There are a lot of us. We are organized, we're unified, we are ready to fight, and we are mighty." That's kind of their stance in front of Jesus. Yet we see they run towards Jesus. They kneel. Kneeling was probably not in the form of worship, but at the same time, they recognized the authority of Jesus. For we are told that Jesus had commanded the demons to come out of the man, but they plead with Jesus in verse 10. And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. The legion of demons thought that they were strong, but they were actually no match for Jesus. They begged Jesus not to send them out of the area. Some translations have the word "out of the country." And there's a lot of background information here. If you're ever interested in reading about it, you can kind of probably do a little search. But there's a lot of information about role of demons. That perhaps this legion of demons were responsible for a particular area. That gets us thinking, right? That there are different demonic forces overseeing different areas. And they're saying simply, don't send us out of this area. Charles Spurgeon, he writes this, that Satan would rather vex swine than to do no mischief at all. He is so fond of evil that he would work it upon animals if he cannot work it upon men. Why? Because they're like, don't send us out of this area. Instead, send us into the pigs. Luke gives us a little bit more insight. In Luke chapter 8, verse 31, it says this, and they, the legion, begged him that he would not command them to go out into the abyss. The abyss was a place of torment, a place demons are imprisoned. And in Jude chapter 1, verse 6, it says this, and the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. This is the abyss, a place demons are cast. By whom? By God. They're like, do not send us there. Anything is better than there. It's almost like the evil spirits knew that they had met their end, and they are pleading with Jesus not to be sent into suffering, sent into torment. It is ironic here. And there's several ironies throughout this story and throughout this encounter. It's ironic that the tormentor is asking not to be tormented. Do not torment us by sending us into the abyss. Let us keep doing what we do, but into the pigs. Jesus gives them permission, and they enter the pigs. The pigs rush off the cliff, and they drown. Jesus' power is demonstrated in that the legion needed Jesus' permission to enter the pigs. The legion is strong. They came out strong. They came out united against Jesus. Yet we see, even in this situation when Jesus is faced with a legion of demons, he demonstrates that he is in control, that he is in charge over the situation. This man has suffered greatly, and yet, because Jesus is always in control, this man had nothing to fear, nothing to worry. What's another thing that we learn about these evil forces this morning? The third point this morning is this, that evil forces know who Jesus is. Look at verses 6 and 7. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." The demons, they sense the presence of Jesus. Mark uses the word immediately as he comes, they immediately fall before Jesus. As soon as Jesus landed, the demons came running to Jesus. They know who Jesus is. Once again, here's another irony in this whole encounter. We go to chapter 4 of Mark, verse 44 or verse 41. The irony is that not many people knew who Jesus was. The disciples certainly didn't. We contrast the demons' admission to the identity of Jesus to the disciples' question in Mark chapter 4, verse 41. They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Who is this? This is the question of the disciples. Who is this? That even the wind and the waves obey him. 1 minute, they're terrified in the boat, right? The story of chapter 4 is that as they're crossing the sea, they're met by a violent storm. The wind is strong, the waves are big, and it's just pounding against the boat. The boat is beginning to take on water. They're frantically trying to get the water out of the boat. They scoop up water with whatever they got. And the next wave comes and just fills up the boat again. It's like this right in the middle of the night. They're searching for answers. And what do they see? They see Jesus sleeping. And this is where they kind of get annoyed and they get kind of angry. And they say, Jesus, teacher, don't you care that we drown? You know how it should be translated? Jesus, we are all trying to save ourselves. And you have the audacity to be sleeping. Get up, get a bucket, and do your part. This is kind of the expression. Jesus is peacefully sleeping. They wake him up because they are so concerned about the storm. They are thinking that this is the end. They are in the midst of the most intense storm of their lives. How many of the disciples were fishermen? How many of them were fishermen on that very lake? It tells you the severity of the storm. It's like unlike anything they have experienced ever in their lives. Who is Jesus? Jesus gets up, kind of looks at the disciples, and then says to the wind and the waves, quiet, be still. Immediately all is calm. The fear the disciples had over the storm now shifts to the fear of Jesus. And they ask, who is this? The irony is that the disciples had to ask, who is this? Who is this Jesus? And yet, the demons know who Jesus is. They come and they say, what do you want with us, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God? Nobody, none of the crowds, none of the people, none of the disciples saw Jesus in this way. The Most High God emphasizes God's absolute rule over heaven and the earth, and under the earth, and including every living creature within those realms. There's no doubt in the minds of the demons who Jesus is. And this Jesus was in their midst. However, Jesus is not welcomed by the people. The combination of the healing of the demon-possessed man and the herd of pigs that drowned was enough for the people to plead with Jesus, please leave this region. We contrast the plea of the demons, do not send us out of this region. The plea of the peoples, please leave this region. The man is ready to go with Jesus. Let's pick up verses 18 through 20. And Jesus was getting into the boat. The man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed. Jesus tells them, go, return home. Return to your own people. Tell them what Jesus has done for you. He becomes a witness, an evangelist for Jesus, telling the people in the Decapolis about Jesus and what he has done for him. Although it would have served the man well to travel with Jesus and learn from him, God had a different plan for him. He was to be a witness for Jesus to his family, to his friends. In the midst of this chaos, whether a storm or confrontation by a legion of demons, Jesus is unfazed. Jesus is in control of the situation. He demonstrates his power. He saves the once demon-possessed man, sets him free, and sends him out to be his witness. You know, one of the cities in the Decapolis, one of the cities is Damascus. Does that city ring a bell in our minds? We know about Damascus in the book of Acts because we know that it was in Damascus where a certain Pharisee by the name of Saul hears that there are those who belong to the way living in Damascus. And as the persecution against the Christians started in Jerusalem and the Christians began to scatter, when Paul or Saul hears that there are Christians living in Damascus, what do we read? That it causes him to receive permission to go to Damascus, find Christians who are living there, to arrest them and to bring them back to Jerusalem for trial. One of the 10 cities of the Decapolis was Damascus. It's a significant city if you think about it, because it was on the way to Damascus where Paul meets Jesus, and the trajectory of his life is forever changed. I have to wonder what the impact of this guy who was healed by Jesus, who was sent by Jesus into what? Into your own people, among the Gentiles, into the Decapolis, to share what Jesus has done for him. I wonder what type of impact that had on people in Damascus, who were receptive of the believers coming in from Jerusalem, who were escaping persecution. I don't think it's a coincidence. Jesus made this short trip to the eastern shores of the Sea of Galilee. He went there to save this tormented man by a legion of demons. A man who wanted to go with Jesus but was commissioned to his own people to tell them what Jesus has done for them. We too have been rescued by Jesus. We have been set free by Jesus and commissioned just like this man. You and I are called to share the story of what Jesus has done for us, to prepare our own communities to meet Christ and to come to a new life. Let me invite the worship team up. We can have a tendency, when we read the story, we can have a tendency to focus on a couple things. We can have a tendency to focus on the rejection. Those poor people. They had Christ in their midst, and yet they asked him to leave. That's been an angle that has been brought up by many people. You think, oh man, these people had Jesus in their midst. Pigs were more valuable. They asked him to leave. If only they were like the Samaritans. And allow Jesus to stay a few moments, a few more days. They missed out on opportunity. Did they really though? God had a different plan. For the people in the Decapolis, they heard from an eyewitness of the power of Jesus. And they saw with their own eyes, hey, this guy is the one that was living in the tomb. Maybe they knew his name. Maybe they knew his identity. And to see him in his right mind, clothed, initially that was great fear. And the economic loss of the pigs, they asked Jesus to leave, but the seed had been planted, and that ministry took place in Decapolis. You and I are called to share that story of what Jesus has done for us, to prepare our own communities to meet Jesus and to come to new life. This is our mission. And this summer, you have an opportunity to be a witness for Jesus. You can be a part of the team that goes to the Navajo Nation to tell them what Jesus has done for you, to share the message of the gospel. It's not obviously limited just to short-term missions. There are many people around you that need to hear, that need to know what Jesus has done for you. Jesus simply says, tell others. We must share it. Let's respond to this song this morning.